And by the end of this session, you'll have more of an awareness on how these harmful energies can affect us. They will also give you some insights on how to reduce your exposure to them, which will ultimately have a positive influence on your health. Please give a warm welcome to Cyril Bourke and Chris Henderson.
Welcome, and thank you very much. So let's start with our first slide, and this was intended to wake people up. Now, why did we use that first slide? That's a set of sounds and a set of images related. Oh, here we go. Press the clicker. There we go. That first slide was a little video putting sound and audio in like an electrical energy. And we are electrical beings, okay? And Chris, my co-presenter, and I are going to have a chat to you about the type of EMF that is all around us, and it goes from light all the way through to mobile phones and 5G and electric fields. And we've been exposed to that for 100 plus years. So we're going to have a look at as many different topics as possible and what type of impact they have, and also what you can do about it. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then Chris is going to take over and start getting into depth with light and hormones and bodily function response, etc. So we're going to give you a lot of information. You'll be able to contact us afterwards. We'll also be at the back on the grass there for anybody that wants to have a chat with us later. And we do have some brochures there. Another form of contacting us is the one that says Dirty Power with a big solar panel on it. And we'll cover some of that in the talk. So here we go. So that's Chris and I. The first slide I've put on there is actually Dr. Robert O Becca. Some of you may have been aware of him. He did lots of testing in the 1980s related to the body in relationship to electrical energy. And even then, as soon as he started looking at the body, he realized that as electrical beings, we were suffering the environment changes that were going on in the 1980s. And he realized that, in his eyes, looking at the way the body functions, that the proliferation of electrical fields were more relevant to us as humans than even global warming was at that time. He wrote a book about it called The Body Electric, and he became an expert in electrical fields and how the body repairs, and he realized that when he was being invited to lots of different specialist groups for information and understanding, he realized that pollution limits were being perverted by the people who were doing the polluting. This is industry. So he was very concerned even then in the late 80s. And that situation has got worse and worse as we've moved along with technology. Now, that slide behind us looks quite blank. It looks like a map. But it's the actual EMF density of Australia in 2002. Now, that's only 16 years ago. Now, if I show you what it was like in 2006, which is what you've got behind you now, all you've seen is a couple of purple dots appear. By the time you got to 2008, you started to see those dots appear along highways and cities. That was the density of telephone and basic EMF transmissions, radio frequencies. Now, that doesn't look too much. But come 2010, we were starting to see bigger groups of energy in cities. By the time you got to 2015, you notice it had gone up extremely, straight up. Now, 2019, that was August. Since then, it's gone up even more. It's a dramatic increase. Now, you can go find that data on wiggle.net, W-I-G-L-E. Okay, so it's 1G. and you can find anywhere, and you can zoom in and actually see the proliferation of electromagnetic fields from industry and telecom. Now, very soon, that entire country is purple. And that's a result of satellites and other transmissions, etc. And you'll see that as we move through the slides. So when people ask us, where should I move to, particularly people who are sensitive to EMF, electrical fields, RF, and telephone systems, they're running out of places to go. Now, a little trivia question for you. Who was the first case of workers' compensation for electromagnetic radiation? Okay, now this is actually quite recent, really. This was 2013 in the February, and this was actually a Dr. McDonald who was a principal scientist for the CSIRO. Now that case changed the world, really, from our perspective, because directly after that, something happened. Now, Lloyd's of London, who are the underwriters for just about every bit of insurance globally, made a strategic change to their insurances. Basically, they called it Exclusion 32. So, in the February of 2015, which was just less than 2 years after the CSIRO lost a case related to non-ionizing radiation as an employee becoming sick working in what was considered a normal working environment for a scientist, suddenly the entire world had an insurance exclusion, which meant if you get sick and your insurance basically won't recognize you can become sick from non-ionizing radiation, they will not insure you. So if any of you work for a company and you've been given a mobile phone, if they didn't give you education and tell you the safety requirements for the use of that phone, even if you had one at home, you'll find that the directors of that company are now directly liable because they have no insurance. And this is a conversation we've had with the Sunshine Coast councils, with the Noosa Council, with Gold Coast Council. They all are, should we say, treading water with hundreds and hundreds of employees in their care who have been given phones with no instruction whatsoever. Now, most of you probably have a phone. In fact, here's a question. Anybody not got a mobile phone? You see, that's pretty rare, isn't it? There's 2 people. And when you bought that phone or you were provided it, the insurance companies had made sure that the manufacturers were aware, and they've put it in the paperwork of the phone and inside the phone in your legal area telling you not to put that phone next to your head, even though the ergonomics of it tell you, well, I pick it up and I speak to it. But you're actually breaking their recommendations, along with not holding it close to the body, because that's in the paperwork as well. They won't hold any blame for damage done by your phone because they know it causes damage. So exclusion 32 occurred as a result of basically cases coming to light, and Lloyd's took it away from everybody. Now the slide behind you is pretty boring, isn't it? You've got a whole series of countries. You may not be able to see them from there, but we're talking about Austria and various European companies all the way across until you got to India and then Australia, Canada, and the USA. Now, this is to do with the amount of radiation that they will allow in the air, in the environment, the accumulative value. Now, because that's really boring, I thought I'd add some values that mean a bit more to you. On the left-hand side, in Austria, they use 1 million times less in their exposure, right? 1 million times less energy to run their telephone network. They still have 4G, they can still watch movies, they still have the internet, they still have transmission towers, but the whole network runs at 1 million times less than here. Now that's pretty remarkable and unusual globally, but let's have a look what the rest of the world is doing. 10,000 times less than we do, 1,000 times less, 417, you get the picture, don't you? All of those countries are operating a telephone network at a fraction of what we are. Now, their network works perfectly fine, which proves we don't need to run our network as high. Now, I looked at all this and I thought, well, maybe we're missing something. Maybe these countries are really, really cautious. I thought, what else do they do that we do that maybe we can compare it to? So I thought, well, they've got cars, they drive on motorways. How fast do they drive? You know, are they really, really cautious? Maybe they apply this cautious notion to everything they do. Well, I had a look at their speed limits on their highways, and actually, they operate at virtually the same or more than we do. Okay, we sit at about 110, don't we? So from a caution point of view, we're all about the same globally on the highways, but from an EMF point of view, Australia, Canada and America are using 1 million times more than the most cautious places, and at least 10 times more than even India. Now, as a result of that, I started looking at what we call, shall we say, what's an acceptable risk? Now, we travel at 110 k's an hour on the highway, and we sacrifice 1,200 people a year. So what we've done is we've balanced, shall we say, commercial requirements, as in getting places and doing things, and what we expect to lose every year. It's about 1,200 people. And that seems, from the sort of general public point of view, that seems to be what we've gone with. Now, how much energy does it take to damage DNA and genes? Well, according to some studies that were done just over 20 years ago, so it's not like it's new and they haven't had time to respond to it, the value in red there is what's required to start damaging DNA in the body. We currently use 10 million times more than that in our telephone network system. Okay? So proven in studies, and that's where we're at the moment. Now people ask, well, is it really affecting my family? Is it really affecting me? Well, there was a report called the Bio-Initiative, and I do recommend looking it up. The Bio-Initiative was written by a whole series of professors. It was done with 21 PhDs and 29 authors. It's about 1,500 pages. So resist pressing the print button, but it is extremely interesting. You can Google all sorts of diseases through it. Just do the search on the PDF, and you'll find lots and lots of data. It's very interesting. Now, that report was repeated and updated in 2019. So the data has been continuously looked at. Behind us, we've got a slide that's showing us in the numbers of studies they looked at, what number of the studies actually showed a distinct effect to the body. Okay, so these are like negative effects. Okay, it averages at about 89%. Okay, so almost 90% of the studies which were independent of industry showed an effect on the body. And that shows us it's something we should be looking at. There was a precautionary suggestion, which wasn't all the way down to, you know, what we know affects us. It was actually reducing it to about 10,000 times what we're at the moment. But that was still ignored. Some of you might know Dietrich Klinghardt. He's a well-known doctor that looks at autism and all sorts of behavior issues and health issues, and predominantly looks at the way that EMF and electromagnetic fields are interfering with the mind and the immune system. And he said that his client basis is basically divided into two. Those that actually do something about the EMF in their environment, and particularly their sleeping environment, and those that don't. And he was very clear, those that did something about it got better, recovered, and those that didn't, they basically continued to remain sick or get worse. So in the medical range of observation, it became very clear to him. This is just a selection of the first page of the summary of the Bio-Initiative. I haven't cherry-picked them. They literally are the first 6 or something off the report, and I encourage you to have a look and see. Basically, you can get genes and DNA damage occurring and we're currently operating about 10 million times more than that point. Things like reduction of sperm count, which is obviously going to have a massive impact on reproduction on Earth. We're currently operating at just under 3 million times more than that threshold. So we really are knowing that we're going to cause that damage. The list goes on, and you can see what happens. But common issues are sleeping disorders, irritation, upset, emotional problems, blood pressure, and it's such a broad spectrum of illness that people have trouble recognizing what's actually happening. Fatigue, these things just go on, and they all have a knock-on effect with various illnesses. I picked up an iPhone 6 and I did a little test. I basically used what's known as an SMP2, which is an industrial meter that measures professionally, and it's used in industry, and we use that with the telecom industry and others. Its accuracy is recorded to the point that it can be used in court by barristers and things, and that's one of the roles that I do. Now, the values at the head of the phone, about 11 microwatts per centimetre squared, which is considered about 26% of the public exposure which is being used here in Australia. So it doesn't sound too bad, does it? Now, if you take that phone and you move it 1 metre away from you, so instead of having it on your desk right in front of you, which often a lot of people do when they're at work, if you just move it 1 metre away, so you're not staring down at it exactly, the values drop to 0.007 microwatts. So even if you don't want to change the way you do things, if you move your phone 1 metre away from you when you're at work or at home, you make a massive difference to the amount of radiation your body picks up and the amount of stress that your body exudes through the process of calcium in the cells. You have to benefit by that. So if you only take one thing away from our talk today, move your phone at least 1 metre away from you, and it'll have a big impact on the way your body toxifies. This is a too common a view. This is a tragedy that we see a lot of, because devices like smart devices, which are all microwave transmitters, are being made attractive, fun, sexy. They want people to have them. They're making them look fun. And yet, most people don't recognize the number of damages occur from microwave transmitters. Tens of thousands of people a week report this type of burn. And unfortunately, the burns that occur are only the last thing that happens. Prior to that, the cells and the mitochondria in the body have changed, and they're exuding stress elements which knock on to chronic disease. Most people's houses are starting to look like this. People probably for Christmas got lots of Wi-Fi things, lots of toys that were controlled that way, Google tools where they can talk to their machines, everything's Wi-Fi and internet, but they're not recognizing what's happening to their bodies in a medium term with this exposure. Even clothing is starting to be connected to the Internet of Things, so they can map exactly what you do, where you go with it, what you wore with it, so they can then market directly to you. And this situation is going to get more and more. Now, in the past, we looked at towers like this, didn't we? And we went, okay, kids, don't need to play under that. We can go play somewhere else, because it looks like a big dinosaur. It looks scary. We know it's got an overhead power cable. We know there's a giant magnetic field, and it seemed obvious, okay? But nowadays, in consults where we go to people's homes and we actually examine the home and see what's really happening, the invisible stuff is very, very clear to us with the testing equipment we use. And this is a common one that I took a photograph recently of. I went into a bedroom. I measured over 200 milligauss of magnetic field in the bed of the family. And they said, well, where can that come from? You know, there's no overhead power or anything of that nature. And I drew them a picture of what I thought was in the back of their junction box, and the husband picked up the screwdriver, I think to try and prove me wrong, and he took the front off, and that was exactly what I'd drawn. That cable set produced enough magnetic field to travel over 3 meters into the bedroom, through the wall, and into the bed, and everybody in that bedroom was suffering chronic disease and stress. We think we know what a telephone tower looks like, don't we? But you'd say, oh yeah, that's one. But now they look like this as well. I see some of you smile, but it's true. They're being built into not just trees, they're being built into church towers, into school roofs, into hospital roofs. They're being put everywhere so people don't even recognize what they are. The proliferation is accelerating dramatically. I went to a school up in Hervey Bay recently, and I measured on the edge of their sports ground. They have a water tower with a transmitter base on the top. The values there are 17,550,000 times more than what's been proven in medical studies to damage DNA and gene expression. Why would you do that to your children here in Queensland if it had been proven in a medical study, which it has been repeatedly? This is the playground of the same school. That's 56 times more than proven to create irreversible infertility. Proven in medical studies, 56 times more here in a Queensland school playground. This is in a local food outlet. The values there are about 1.5 times more than a mobile phone to your head, and that was actually measured over the vegetables. Now, when they wrote the exposure values 20 years ago, it was based on 2G, which functions quite differently, and it was based on heavy usage being 30 minutes of use spread over 7 days. How many 30-minute calls do you have a week now? Right? So this is well beyond what people should be looking at in their shops. The US military knew about this, and they annexed the data for 50 years to let industry go ahead and do what they could, keeping a secret of what this type of damage was doing to people. Anybody know what this is? It's a pretty ugly looking thing, isn't it? That is Sky Muster 1 and Sky Muster 2. There's 2 of them. They look just the same. There's the NBN from satellite. And we've been going out and measuring not only homes, but farms all over the Queensland coast. And where we've found you can't get a mobile phone signal, you're finding RF levels as high as sitting in the Gabba in Brisbane. Now, why is that? Because they're being bombarded with satellite. And when I've spoken to the farmers over the last 2.5 years, their production of beef has reduced to between 30 and 40%. So they're seeing the fertility issues, and they're nowhere near a telephone tower. It's because of the satellites hammering down on them. They're the frequencies. They're in the 20s and 30s gigahertz. So if you ever have your own meter, or you have a building biologist visit you and say, okay, we can test it out, unless they've got meters that go up to 40 gigahertz or 60 gigahertz, then they can't tell you what's going on. And that's where professionals like us come in, because that's what we do. We do testing for the councils, for the telecoms, for the power companies, with equipment that actually does do the measurement as required. That's the coverage of Australia with satellites. Now, the blue ones are big rings that are about 325 kilometers across, and the small cells are actually 125 kilometers. There is nowhere on this continent where you are not being bombarded by satellites now. This is another issue. This is what's called a HAPS, and HAPS is made by Airbus, and that is being launched every day from Western Australia. So Airbus ship them in containers, put the wings on, and set them up into the sky. They can stay there indefinitely, but they actually bring them down every 6 months to have a look at them. They take the sunlight, and then they use that to run all the electric motors, and they basically can operate as pseudo satellites. Now, one of the things most people don't realize about the 5G process is it's not about telephones. It's about all the other tools that come with high-density radiation, including high-density power transfer, which you don't hear anybody talk about. That's where they grab energy and then they beam it down to you so you can have your equipment charged. In the future, your phones and your homes and everything that they can charge you for will be charged from these types of technologies. It's going to be beamed down to you. The level of electromagnetic energy is going to be very disruptive to all of us. That's what it looks like. It only takes 4 people to take it off the ground. Up and away. It takes 8 hours to get to 73,000 feet, which means it's sitting about 30,000 feet above the airplanes that we travel internationally on. There are devices that can read up to 60 gig, and we actually make them available. I'm part of a project to make 60 gig readers available and affordable for the public for 2020. So if you want more information about that, don't hesitate talking to us. Dirty power. All of you have seen the adverts when it comes to the government trying to encourage everybody to put solar panels on their roof. And we thought that was green energy, didn't we? Well, the source may be green, but what it does is it chops up the electrical fields into some very aggressive patterns, which then break down the nervous system of the body. It's very, very common for people, once they have solar panels put into their house, the inverters chop it up in a similar way to smart meters, and then your nervous system gets exhausted and eventually you go into chronic disease. It can be resolved with smoothing, and if they'd only built that into the inverters, you wouldn't have this issue. So there's an engineering solution to an engineering problem. Simple stuff that plugs in, proven all around the world. For those that want to actually isolate themselves and actually be able to sleep at night and detox from this process of poisoning from EMFs, there are paints, there are shieldings that we help people understand and see if they're suitable for their environment and their homes, and actually build what's referred to as a Faraday cage, but basically they're zero energy rooms. Ones where you go in, you shut the door, the electric fields from the walls don't affect you, the RF doesn't affect you, and you detox overnight. And that's one of the few ways that you can survive this environment that we're living in long term. So it's something to be aware of. One of the things I say to people is don't rent it, don't build it, don't move into it until somebody's looked at it and you understand what's there, because most of these things are invisible until we check. And I'm not just saying about telephone towers. There are all sorts of issues related to electrical fields, RF fields, magnetic fields that influence homes, that make people sick. And we specialize in helping them find those and then resolving those issues. Now, that's a pretty rushed first 20 minutes, and I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Chris Henderson, and he's going to look at the light process, because with that, you can make massive changes to your health. Here you go, Chris.
Thank you, Cyril. Round of applause for Cyril. Fantastic, fantastic, everybody. I'm a functional diagnostic practitioner, and I've spent the last 2 or 3 years helping people with functional lab testing, so looking at stool studies, liver studies, hormone studies, supplements. My own story is I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease 20 years ago and a secondary autoimmune disease, ankylosing spondylitis, 10 years ago. So I've had a 20-year journey of looking at alternative therapies as far as healing and getting better and pushing the envelope. My deep dive into the rabbit hole of light came when my prescription glasses were no longer working for me. I was looking at screens all day and my eyes were failing me, and we all work on screens day in, day out, and what we don't realize is that this light is very damaging to our eyes. I started to look into the work of Dr. Jack Cruz and decided, okay, I'm not going to go for another prescription. I'm going to use natural light, morning sunlight, and I'm going to block artificial light at night with blue blocking glasses. I did that for about 6 to 8 weeks. Within that time, my eyes fixed up. Just healed my eyes, could read books again, ditched the tablet, ditched the readers and the Kindles. So there's a lot of power in natural light and also a lot of power in artificial light. So we'll go into that. So light is a super important EMF. So Cyril's spoken a lot about man-made EMFs. We've evolved for millions and millions of years to pick up the natural wavelengths and spectrums of the sunlight, including the unseen portions of the sunlight, including infrared and near-infrared light, and also UV light. And UV light is an interesting topic because it's been much maligned, and interesting to see you guys at Woodford. Everyone's out in the sun, getting midday sun, and obviously understand that this is a massive part of life and health. Dr. O Becca, who Cyril mentioned previously, his actual research showed that the light powers the electrical signal into your cell. It creates a DC electrical charge that basically charges your cells like a battery. With non-native EMF that Cyril mentioned, that actually dehydrates this cellular water. So if you think about that, we need to get out in the sun as much as we can to actually charge that current in our cells for our body to work. It works basically like a battery. You are a battery. You're water and you create energy just like a battery. And Dr. O Becca's research showed that. Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, award-winning scientist, his research showed that we're biophotonic. We absorb light, but we also emit light. So you're a being of light. Some of the research showed that when animals die, they've got a camera that they set up in Japan. Actually, over a 24, 48-hour period, the body of the animal or the plant emits light slowly. So we think about the soul is light. It's emitting light. We are light. Amazing researcher. So I'm just building the case for light, okay? It's not a demon. It's not something you need to run from. You are light. A couple of my heroes here. Dr. John Ott. He used to be Walt Disney's cinematographer. He created time-lapse photography for Walt Disney. And what he found was when he was filtering light out, when he was looking at doing time-lapse for flowers, when he filtered certain wavelengths of light out, the flowers would not open. The circadian rhythm was lost. So he did about 20 years of research with plants, with animals, and then finally in America they got him into schools in the 80s to strip out all the old fluoro lighting and put in full spectrum lighting. And the results from that were kids who had behaviourally challenged issues calmed down and general productivity rose. And this was the 80s. So I don't know if anyone here is a teacher or works for Queensland Health or Education. Still got these old fluoros in our schools, so we need to be looking at that as well. Anyone know Dr. Jack Cruz? Heard of Dr. Jack Cruz? Yeah, pretty controversial figure at the moment. I love his little moniker there that full spectrum sunlight can be compared to a balanced meal. Red light is health food. UV light is like caffeine or jet fuel, so nothing to be scared of. But blue light is like junk food. Blue light on its own is like junk food. So just give you an idea of how light can penetrate. This is a subcutaneous layer of the skin. Blue light penetrates that basic early level, and then you get red and near infrared going right through into the subcutaneous fat layers of the skin. The sunlight is comprised of about between 42 and 47% red and near infrared light. This is what the sun is made of. That's what it does. It penetrates right through your body, generates energy into your mitochondria, and generally that's why it has an effect. This is a very interesting slide. Anyone heard of melanin? You're building it now when you're walking around Woodford all week. You have melanin in not just your skin, but your eyes, your brain, everywhere. All your body is tuned for that EMF spectrum. As Cyril said, there's another EMF spectrum they're building on top of that, which are also affecting how you're tuned to that. So you're tuned via melanin to absorb the whole spectrum of electromagnetics. This is blood cells, so on the left is your red blood cell, and on the right is chloroplast, so a plant's basic blood cell. They're very similar in structure, right? They take light in and they use it for energy. Plants use a certain spectrum. The human body uses all the full spectrum of light. This is not the Sunshine Coast's new hospital. This is not the new hospital. This is back in the 1900s. They used to, obviously in America, they used to treat different diseases, rickets, TB, get people out in the sun. Do we see that in hospitals these days? No, you're in a humidified area, artificial light. How do you heal in that predicament? Dr. Auguste Rollier, this is in Switzerland. These are the hills of Switzerland. This was a common practice. So if you were sick, you'd go to these sanitariums and you'd go to these light clinics, get your gear off and bathe in the sunlight, bathe in the full spectrum light for healing. These sort of dropped off when vitamin D started to be synthesized commercially. So again, commercial organizations putting it in milk and saying, right, you get your vitamin D from milk and it's synthesized unnaturally. How many people live and work like this? Hands up if you work in an office situation like this. Even in homes, we've got lighting like this. So we've become trained and we're not suffering less and less from malnutrition and more from what we would term malillumination. So we've dealt with the supplements and the food and the exercise, but we haven't dealt with the light environment. Who's heard of blue light toxicity? Okay, this is how we're building our homes. We're building our homes with LED lighting, that's predominantly blue and green light, that affects our eyes, affects our skin. We have receptors, how I said before, we have receptors on all our skin for melanin, for EMF. We have receptors on our skin for blue light in particular. Blue light is a very energy-dense wavelength on its own. It's very dangerous on its own, even down to the fact that the FDA in America, they're putting warnings on LED lights for consumers. We've gone from incandescent, candlelight to incandescent. These, as Cyril said, energy-saving mechanisms. How many people have had eye strain, fatigue, headaches on technology with screens? Pretty common. I think Sydney Morning Herald stated that 60 to 70% of people, there's a big insomnia epidemic in Australia. What are we doing before we go to bed? Screens, lighting. It's affecting our sleep hormones and our receptors for blue light on our skin. The brain thinks we want to be awake when we need to be asleep. So we need to be looking at the quality, the quantity, and the timing of the lighting that we're getting. This is a very interesting story. Who saw the story on the ABC with the politician who had the red light therapy helmet? Max Burr was a Tasmanian politician who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was struggling with his medication. It wasn't working anymore. He was losing his sense of smell. He was losing his fine motor movements. He couldn't play the piano anymore. And his doctor was retiring and doing more and more research into light therapy. They found a study at the Sydney University by Professor Mitrofanis on mice models and brain neuro regeneration. They called him up and they said, "Can you help Max?" And he said, "Look, there's no human trials. How long will I have to wait for a human trial? Maybe 10 years. He said, "I'll be dead in 10 years. So he said, "Let's just do this ourselves." So he went to a local men's shed and they built helmets for him. Within 6 months, he was better. Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's. I think Dr. Sam is talking at the greenhouse, or maybe just finished, on Alzheimer's and dementia. You need to look at this guy. They're shipping out helmets from men's sheds all over the country. The professor came back to him and said, "Hey, we want to run human trials." They're starting human trials. The guys at the men's shed, I spoke to him. He said, "Look, we're not interested in the results. The results will be buried. We'll just keep on doing this." After they ran the Facebook ad and the ABC ran the ad, they get 600 orders from around the world, shipping these helmets to neurodegenerative patients and clients. Okay, so we understand blue light, red light. Why is UV light so demonized? We're told to slip, slop, slap all the time. I'm from the UK originally, and I remember the early 80s, 90s, slip, slop, slap campaign. We're now told by SunSafe Queensland or maybe Cancer Council, you have to wear hats, sunscreen, sunglasses every time you go into the sun. Every time during the day. And there's big posters, don't let the sun affect your DNA. So this big machine is telling us on one hand, hey, cover up, but guess what? The research shows that indoor workers have a higher incidence of melanoma than outdoor workers. This is trials, this is studies. It's from the Cancer Council's own information. Vitamin D. Who's heard of vitamin D and its benefits? Lots of benefits. Who takes vitamin D orally, supplementally? Who uses the sun to build their vitamin D up? Yep. Preaching to the converted, I might as well get off the stage. We have an issue with vitamin D in terms of when I was sending clients to do blood testing, I'd never seen some optimal levels of vitamin D. We're all suboptimal. And I'm talking about suboptimal in terms of cancer risk, heart disease, depression. We're suboptimal. If you get your level read from the doctor, as long as you're within the range, you're fine. I'm here to tell you you're not. You need to get it way above. We need to building it up so when it comes to winter, you have enough storage so you can get by that part of the season where there's less UV yield. This is from Curtin University. This is a map showing the percentage of low vitamin D. This is from winter. So 50% of southern states are deficient in vitamin D during winter. 38% in Western Australia deficient in winter. I think it's 15% in Queensland, but again, these aren't optimum levels. These are just within range levels. We need to push it way higher. These are all the conditions related to suboptimal vitamin D only. Vitamin D controls, what people don't realize, it's not a vitamin, it's a very powerful hormone, and the levels need to be upped significantly. Vitamin D controls about 10% of your entire nuclear genome, so it basically controls the expression of your genes. It controls about 300 to 400 genes in the human breast alone. So if you're a woman, that has to be significant for you. We talk about breast cancer on the rise. Basically controls all your hormones as well, so synthesizing all your hormones, getting up early, getting that red light, near-infrared light, helps to activate hormones. Who's heard of melatonin here, sleep hormone? Guess when it's built? In the morning with light via the eye, interacting with your neurochemistry. So it's not built at night, it's released at night. But what happens at night? We flick on the lights and the brain says it's midday because of these spectrums and melatonin gets depressed. Depression, anxiety, as I said, it builds all... You have a pocket theory of chemistry in your brain that just needs the right signal via your eyes at the right time, and you'll unleash it. I think there's been talks here about cannabis and endocannabinoids, receptors for those. You can build those endocannabinoids up with sunlight. You can build nitric oxide up with sunlight. You can build all sorts of chemicals up with sunlight at the right time. Blood testing, I think that's a major study showing that you could reduce the risk of at least 16 different cancers optimizing your vitamin D levels. Gut issues. Who's followed a lot of gut science and kombucha and probiotics, etc., etc., etc.? Who knows that vitamin D controls the entire mucosal membrane of the gut? Not many people. So not necessarily all about probiotics or fermented foods, healing that gut lining, but UV light, infrared light, red light. There's a massive... I'd encourage people to look at a researcher called Jeff Leach. He's on the internet. He worked with the Hodja Tribe in Africa and Tanzania. They're on an equatorial line, getting a lot of sunlight, grounded, low EMF. They eat a lot of rubbish. They're eating a lot of junk food, smoking pot, having antibiotics. And their gut lining was just as diverse as the natives that weren't touched by tourists or the natural tourism. So their environment was building their gut up to a degree where they could actually assault their gut and it would still be well and regenerate very, very quickly. This is an interesting study. Sun can indeed shine out of your... I can't say that on the stage. This was a major study done using sunlight where the UV exposure actually increased the diversity of the microbiome in the test study, in the cases. They didn't replicate the same results with supplements only. It was only the women who had the UV light exposure on their body, not supplements. Autoimmune conditions. Who's aware of autoimmune? I am. Last 20 years been dealing with autoimmune. Interesting research coming out of Western Australia. Dr. Marshall shows that the immune system is affected by vitamin D. Autoimmune is affected by levels of vitamin D. There's possibly a polymorphism or an issue with the receptor on the cell for people with autoimmune conditions in terms of vitamin D. So we can't get it into the cell efficiently enough as opposed to the general public. So we have to be very careful on how much sun we're getting, how much artificial light we're getting, our levels. So testing a couple of times a year is very worthwhile. This absolutely blew me away. Again, Professor Marshall's work in his cohort of 200 autoimmune condition studies. Between 1 and 6 gigahertz affects how your body takes vitamin D up. What is that? What's 1 to 6 gigahertz? It's your router. Your router you're using for your Wi-Fi at home works between 1 and 6 gigahertz. If you've got a sickness, you need to deal with that because that's affecting how your body's taking vitamin D up in the cellular level. To supplement and not to supplement. And again, who takes supplements, vitamin D supplements? A few. You've got to be very careful because it's a very powerful hormone. Vitamin D on its own, it's dangerous to do that. You have to have the fat-soluble vitamins and all the other cofactors going with it. Nature knows best. Nature's programmed sunlight into your system. So when you have enough UV, it'll shut off. Your storage will shut off. The UVA in the light, you get vitamin D from UVB, UVA will shut that off. So once your tank's topped up, that's all good. But if you're popping pills, there's no regulation of that. You've got to be very, very careful. 10 minutes. My suggestion in terms of what I do is optimize your vitamin D levels. You can talk to me about testing. I work with a clinical nutritionist, and we set people away with vitamin D testing they can do in their own home. Basically just a lanyard. You can do a blood draw in your own home. Don't need a doctor. Don't need to go to a pathologist, to do a blood draw, send it into the lab, and optimize your vitamin D. Test it, optimize it, work with light, work with your artificial light and your diet, and we can work with that. My health coaching business is Diagnostic Health Solutions. You can find me there. So yeah, optimize your vitamin D levels, look at testing twice a year. Sorry, also, there's an app on your phone. I know this is counterintuitive to what Cyril was talking about. There's an app called DMinder, D-Minder. Anyone heard of DMinder? Okay, you can use that to track your vitamin D, put your skin type in, put your location in, put your sex in, your male, female, and your skin type and your location, and that'll actually calculate how much sun you need and when during that day to optimize your vitamin D. I also run another company called BioLight. I'm fairly passionate in terms of getting people to understand how artificial light can affect their health. So you can talk to me about blue blocking glasses. You can talk to me about any commercial or domestic installations of lighting. I'm bringing out a full spectrum light that has trace infrared in it. Again, so not to take the place of getting in the sun, but when we are indoors and we are in the office or we are at home, we can optimize the light to be more congruent with our physiology and our biology. Also very interesting, I'm trying to team up with a company in the UK who do UV penetrable swimwear and casual wear, so you can optimize that vitamin D on your skin in winter. Sure. Falling asleep.
We're going to. We've got a couple of moments before the end, so we're going to do some Q&A. This is something that we've been talking to a lot of groups about, and it's basically our view on what's actually happening from the dictatorship point of view. We, the people, require transparency in environmental and health policies, not a dictatorship ruled by banks and industry. That's something that we've basically got in our minds. Chris and I run workshops to actually explain in detail to either practitioners or families or people who want to build their own homes or tiny homes. We help advise them on what they're trying to do and the best way to do it. There's one of our emails there, admin@healthexpressworld.com. So this is an opportunity for Chris and I to answer questions here, and we've got some support staff here who are going to be able to pass a microphone out. So if anybody's got any questions about EMF or anything else, we'll see if we can help.
If we're not to use LED lights in the house, what is the light we should be using?
Should be using more full spectrum light, and that's what I'm trying to bring to the marketplace. I used to work in lighting myself, so in terms of LED, the warm white ones are a little bit better. They're mainly green spectrums, but at night, studies have been showing that green element degrades melatonin as well. So more full spectrum light. I'd suggest at night that you turn the main lights off and you use maybe a red light bulb or a yellow light bulb. I can talk to you about those later on. You need to bring the mood down and get all the blue light out of the lighting in the home at night. Or use blue blockers.
Use what?
Blue blockers. I've got a set in my bag. They're orange glasses. They use at night to block the blue light coming into the eye, so the eye doesn't get the signal. So yeah, your brain thinks it's darkness and can excrete sleep hormone as opposed to getting stimulated. Yep.
It's basically trying to prevent the response in the adrenal process. So what happens is if you turn a bright light on just before you go to bed, you get this feeling. And what it is you're getting cortisol fired into the body and the melatonin is getting flashed out. So you're now not going to easily fall asleep for 4 or 5 hours because the body thinks it's mid-morning, that bright white light. You told your body that you're out, out in the bright daylight, and that's going to prevent you sleeping. So you know when you've done it because immediately you've messed yourself up and you have trouble sleeping. Experiment with lowering the lights, use candles, do a few things to try that, and you'll suddenly find you'll go to sleep much easier. Next question. Here you go.
I was curious about through which body parts you take the light. Now, at the end, when you said with the blue blockers, it sounds like you take in light mostly through the eye. Is that right? And also, how does then our clothing, if it's not only through the light, influence the amount of vitamin D when we expose ourselves to the sun? Like, does it matter if I'm wearing only a shirt or a long sleeve, or what about like where? How do we?
I think cotton clothing, you get more of the UV through. Synthetic, not so much. So your light, you're right about the eye, but the rest of the skin. So as far as I try and look at that DMinder to see where your sweet spot is, as far as you need as much exposure as you can at the right time, and it's not a lot of time. So you need to expose more of the body to natural light, and then in artificial circumstances, actually put more clothes on, right? Because you have receptors to all this blue light. So when I'm at home at night, I've got gear on like this, and especially, say, women who've got thyroid illness, and you're on a computer, get this covered up. Dr. Jack Cruz talks a lot about that. I'd recommend looking at him on the internet, Dr. Jack Cruz.
Yeah. My question is about EMF jewelry. What's your perspective on what is a good endorsed product for protecting you?
Okay, no jewelry is going to protect you from EMF. Okay, it's a real straightforward one. The pendants, the rocks, all the rest of it. Whenever they do a study of these things, they never come out changing your EMF exposure. Okay, even when we do testing with Faraday cages and shielding materials such as silver and copper woven into a fabric and then encapsulated in a polymer, if we were to just wrap it around our head or wrap it around our neck or put it over our shoulder, it has no impact on the absorption until we cover the whole body all the way to the ground. And a pendant around your neck is not going to have any impact on the amount of EMF that's coming into the body, and your cells are creating a calcium response. I'm sorry, but they look nice, they're great. Have them as trinkets, but they do not, categorically do not, have any impact on your absorption with RF. There's a microphone floating around somewhere.
Here.
Hi.
Hi. At work, is it as simple as turning down your blue on your monitor and turning the red up?
You can use various pieces of software like f.lux. You have to have the software. You have to wear block. You can get day blockers. They're clear and they'll help reduce the flicker and the amount of spiking of the light. So I can come in here. I'll show you. I've got a pair in my bag. So I'd recommend, that's how I lost my eyesight. I used to work in an insurance agency. Within about 3 months, I couldn't see anything. I destroyed my eyes. You need the protection. No, they won't. Dimming it down won't do it. The flicker, Cyril talked about dirty power. We're on the power grid. Everything's turned up. Everything's flickering millions of times per minute. You need to protect your eyes from that and your brain from that.
Right, we've got time for one more question, and this lovely lady's got one for you.
Thank you. You can buy those commercial lights that change colour. Are they any good, is one question, and the second one is, what about far infrared for health?
I'm not sure which lights you're talking about, like the Christmas lights.
No, they're LEDs, but they change colour.
Okay.
They sort of go into nighttime and...
Sure.
Yeah.
It would probably be better than any white or warm white LED. If it's changing colour, there's a possibility it could be okay. As far as far infrared, like a sauna, that's more for heating the body. You'll find that near infrared is less heat. It's more wavelength. It's more just the wavelength penetrating your body, so it's not creating heat. So far will create heat. Near is not less heat. It's more penetrating the body right into the cellular level. You see the big red light panels that are becoming very popular these days? People in therapy, all different types of therapies using red light panels, for health. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much, ladies and gents. Please give a round of applause for Cyril and Chris Henderson. Thank you very much. I am sure that you've got a lot more questions to ask these lovely fellows. They are more than willing to answer any questions you have. They did ask me if you do have anything, please go at the back and pick their brains with anything you'd like to ask them. Good opportunity. They are insightful, lovely and intelligent men. So I thank you very much, guys, for honouring us with